It was one of those notifications, Camilla, that you get on your phone and you actually click on because it was such a surprise. Late last night, notification from the Telegraph saying that Liam Payne, the One Direction star, had died. We get so many notifications about so many things, but this was a real moment because maybe not for people my age, but certainly for my children's age group, he was a megastar that almost went on a journey of growing up with them. And when people have their life taken away from them at such an early age, it affects all generations, whether you kind of knew his songs or he's understood the fame of One Direction, who for a period were one of the biggest groups in the world. It really affects you and the conversations that spin off from it. It appears from the details we have so far that he died whilst staying at a hotel in Buenos Aires in Argentina. He seems to have fallen from the third floor after the police were called to attend reports of what was described as an aggressive man who may have been under the effects of drugs and alcohol. It's one of those story arcs that we've seen so many times. A boy from very ordinary background. I think his father was a baker. He came from Wolverhampton in the Midlands. He shot to this huge level of fame, and he spoke incredibly honestly about the mental pressures that had put him under, and when the band broke up, him struggling to find a role for himself, given that he was already hugely famous.
I appreciate some of you might not be quite familiar with Liam Payne. Let's just go through his history. So he first auditioned for the 5th series of X Factor. That was back in 2008. He was only 14 at the time, Kamal, just a young lad. And he made it all the way to the judges' houses before he was cut from the competition and told by X Factor host Simon Cowell to return in 2 years. I think Cowell felt at the time he was too young to take it all on. He did return to the show in 2010 for the 7th series. Again, he failed. On this occasion, he failed to progress past the stage where they go to the judges' houses, but guest judge Nicole Scherzinger suggested that he should join a boy band so he could qualify for the group category of the show. One Direction is formed on X Factor. Suddenly they go from complete obscurity to total global fame. It's like a kind of noughties version of the Beatles, isn't it, really, Kamal?
It was amazing, Kamal. I remember watching it. They were a huge phenomenon. They didn't actually win.
No, they came
third. But obviously Simon Cowell and his company Psycho spotted something in those 5 young boys that was going to work on a global stage.
As is ever the case with boy bands, it comes to an end at some point when someone wants to leave. In this case, that was 2015. Zayn Malik decided to leave the band. That then left probably the most famous member, Harry Styles, who's gone on to launch an extremely successful solo career behind, along with fellow bandmates, Liam, of course, and then Niall and Louis. They all went their separate ways, have had differing degrees of success with their own solo careers. In Liam Payne's case, he did have a debut album, LP1, that was released 3 years after the split. It got largely indifferent, negative reviews. It was a bit of a commercial disappointment, which must have been very difficult for him. He remained in the headlines, though, Kamal, because of his relationship with Girls Aloud star Cheryl Cole.
We should remember as well, they had a child, and
Yes.
that child, Bear, is now 7. So obviously there's the tragedy for Liam himself, but there's the normality of family and the hole that leaves for all of them.
Yeah, boy's lost his dad, regardless of the media coverage. This is a very human story with tragedy and grief now at the heart of it. It is fair to say that Liam Payne did cut quite a troubled figure.
It is so easy to forget that there's just a human individual here who could be very similar to many other human individuals. An amazing revelation that we just heard about just before we came up to record the podcast, Camilla. One of our colleagues, JB Johnson, was at the Cannes Film Festival some years ago as a young journalist, and he recognised Liam Payne at one of the Cannes Film Festival parties. His father also came from Wolverhampton, as Liam did, And he went up to him at the party and just said, hello. Not often you see a guy from Wolverhampton in parties like this. And this is what happened next.
We're fortunate in this job to meet a wide range of well-known people, from politicians to sports stars to actors and musicians. Some of those interactions really stay with you though, and this one has. Now, it was summer 2019 and I was covering the Cannes Film Festival for The Telegraph when I was invited to an evening event. In a room full of stars, I was out of my depth, but spotted a young British man from the same hometown as my father, so I went over and said, "It's not often you see a bloke from Wolverhampton in a place like this." With that, Liam Payne's eyes lit up and said, "Wolverhampton? No one here knows what it's like growing up there." He was affable, charming, and had the good humour to admit that despite singing in front of 30,000 people at Molineux, the Wolverhampton Wanderers stadium, he was in fact a West Brom fan. Now, of course, by this stage he had the trappings of celebrity lifestyle. He turned to introduce me to Rita Ora, who asked what we were talking about. "Wolverhampton, the Black Country," he shot back. "It was easy for you. You only had to get out of Ladbroke Grove. We're from the West Midlands." And with that, conversation was easy and open. We spoke about music, football, and he revealed how he really broke his wrist at bandmate Niall Horan's 21st birthday party. While all the tabloids wrote that it was breakdancing, he assured me it was something way more stupid. But then someone came around with a tray of cigars. We both said we didn't smoke. And then he said, "Last time I had a cigar, my mum told me off." I was slightly taken aback that one of the world's most famous and rich pop stars was still being told off by his mum. And I said, "Well, that's not very rock and roll." He went on to explain that he was in what he called Vegas with the boys, and his dad saw a picture of him smoking a cigar, told his mum, who then phoned him and told him off. There was something very human about that. Now look, I don't claim to know him beyond that evening, but I left with the impression that he was one of life's good guys. He was proud of his son, showing pictures. He was proud of his work, even grabbing the aux cable to change the music in the room. And he seemed to have a lot of life still to live.
It's fair to say, Kamal, that in recent years Liam Payne did cut quite a troubled figure, and to be fair to him, he was very open about the problems he had suffered. He was very open about his problems with addiction, his mental health problems, the price he basically paid for fame. This is Stephen Bartlett speaking to Liam Payne on his Diary of a CEO podcast.
Is there a moment where you look back and say that was the lowest moment for me? That was the pivotal moment.
I had a few of them. I was worried how far my rock bottom was going to be. Where's rock bottom for me? And you would never have seen it. I'm very good at hiding it. No one would have ever seen it. But rock bottom, I mean, I don't even know if I hit it yet. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like one of those little graphs you see when it's like, oh, have we hit the support, the market support? Yeah, are we there? This is the support level. Oh my God. You know, it's the same thing. So it feels like I can either make that choice now and pick my last moment as my rock at the bottom, or I can make a new one and make a whole new low. That's my choice.
Of course, we've seen an outpouring of grief and condolences sent to his family, his loved ones, Liam's family and Liam's loved ones. But, Camilla, as we so often see in our responses to high-profile deaths, it almost raises the very problems that these people were struggling with. It becomes voyeuristic, highly aggressive, people raking over the coals in highly inappropriate ways. Looking at the coverage, for example, from the American showbiz site TMZ, many people would say it has been disgusting. They actually broke the news by showing a picture of Liam's body where it had fallen from the balcony. It was partially published. And it is that fact that we are, as a population now, are able to share instantaneously everything is almost part of the reason that people like Liam Payne go on journeys that they go on. And I think we're going to move into this conversation, but he is famous, and so the peculiarities of what he suffers are for people who have that type of image. But we can see the trickle-down effects for all of us in a way.
Yes.
That we are all, famous or not, part of this industry where there is an incredibly low bar to publication, and an incredibly aggressive audience, and that those things intertwine with each other to create a toxic environment. Now, of course, that toxicity is often at its highest with very, very famous people, and we can go through some of the awful events we've seen for people like Britney Spears and whoever it may be. But it also affects all of us to an extent, and young people and older people, because everyone can have that moment when that toxicity hits them.
What does it say about society these days, Kamal, when we can have a media organisation purporting to be respectable? I mean, I know it's TMZ, but it's very, very high profile and well followed, even beginning to think that it's a good idea to be posting imagery of Liam Payne's corpse. And what is it saying about us as a society that some of us want to look at that imagery? This is actually where I feel we have crossed a Rubicon when it comes to our appetite for information, and indeed the whole social media landscape basically being this greedy monster that needs to be fed. And people like Liam Payne end up being the bait. This idea that just because the imagery in the video exists, we must all have a right to see it. There's something so eerie about the fact that this young man, let's not infantilise him, he was 31. It's always easy, isn't it, when you look at child stars, to just keep them in that period when they're a teenager appearing on X Factor. This was a grown man and he was a dad. But at the same time, there he is recording videos for Snapchat an hour before that call comes through that he has died. It tells us something about the life we live these days, that first of all, everyone is always on. Okay, he's there. He's been to Niall Horan, his bandmate's solo concert. He wants to register that with his public. There's obviously this desire, isn't there, to kind of keep the social media end up, keep the fans happy, make sure that everyone's clicking and liking everything. Presumably inside he's feeling absolute turmoil. Something's going very, very horribly wrong in his life. And I think that also translates to the audience. Less famous people who are also engaging in this sort of treadmill of endlessly sharing and having to participate and having to get reactions to everything they do all the time. I mean, we see it with our own children. It's frightening.
Some of it is down to who we are as people, but it's also down to the technology we have been given, which appeals to those base instincts. We all know when we drive past a road accident, what do you have to really try and do? You have to really try to stop yourself looking at it. It is in all of us. What social media has done is allowed us to constantly be passing road accidents and trying to stop ourselves look at them. But it's so easy to look in that private space between you and your phone that you keep looking. The man is called Asa Raskin. He is the man who invented the infinite scroll. The idea that once you're on your phone, looking through X, looking through Instagram, it never stops. There's always a chance that you're going to see something either that horrifies you or delights you. The next video, the next post you're going to see. He says how much he has regretted inventing the infinite scroll. But he had an amazing quote about what this had done for us as a human society. Technology has overwhelmed human weakness, because the algorithms play into those weaknesses that we all have, which is, I always find it quite difficult sort of criticizing ourselves. Who are we that we want to look at this stuff? But there is a base instinct about our psychological response to danger and horror, which is the idea of we have to be prepared. If someone shouts, "There's a tiger," we need to be ready to run. And so it is a very powerful psychological instinct of horror, because it makes us recoil and it makes us ready to act, and it produces adrenaline and dopamine correctly for physical responses. But what the technology platforms, and I think this is where we have never had a proper debate as a society, whether that's for famous people or for all of us, the technology companies have used the tricks of getting into that psychological response to keep us on their platforms and ultimately to get us to spend money. I mean, ultimately, it's a commercial transaction. And the scroll, which of course becomes the doom scroll, is what traps you in these spaces. And that's where the debate needs to move to. And I think it's going to be the same debate very similar debate to how we would have discussed smoking. You know, the product becomes available before the dangers are clear.
There's a really interesting quote actually by the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, and he's said a lot about how children's brains are being rewired by excessive mobile phone use. And he's talking about the phone. When the phone was invented, it was our servant. We would use it to get from A to B or find out more information about X, Y, or Z. Now it's become our master. We are absolutely sort of beholden to it. And in the case of Liam Payne, fame is difficult at the best of times. You cited the example of Britney Spears. We can go back through time and look at a lot of child stars particularly. We can go back through time, Judy Garland, her daughter Liza Minnelli, Macaulay Culkin, Drew Barrymore. We have so many examples of child stars that go off the rails just because they have to cope with fame so young. We're in a different arena of fame now, aren't we, with Liam Payne, because you're talking about doom scrolling and the audience's insatiable desire, not just for information now, but to be voyeuristic, for the stars themselves constantly having to be available to their public, constantly having to update their public. I would imagine for somebody as famous as Liam Payne, and we are talking about huge levels of global fame here, it is like Beatlemania for the next generation. There is absolutely nowhere to hide. And then I would imagine you're also under an obligation because of your record company commitments and your clothing deals and your other PR obligations. You are then also having to feed this greedy monster. And that is why you see, you know, the Snapchat videos and all the rest of it. It's interesting because some stars lately have said, enough's enough. I do not want to be out and about with a phone in my face, being surrounded by fans, asking for selfies, everyone wanting a piece of me. Because back in our day, Kamal, to be fair, sound like we're really old now, but if we saw a celebrity, you might go up and you might be brave enough to ask for a signature, an autograph, maybe on a napkin in a restaurant or whatever. But there was a respectful distance, I think, between the famous and the non-famous. You might be told no. What you certainly wouldn't have is the mechanics of a phone to just start filming them without their permission, which often happens, or even dream of having a photograph together. I mean, that would be a rarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Fame was over there. It was like a castle on the hill because there was no mechanism of communication like we have now. Communication was completely controlled by the big film houses, the big music companies, the big television companies. You had no access to that. But what social media and smartphones has created is a porosity between us and fame. Now, you and I, Camilla, because of your shows on television, I was formerly on the BBC, we have had, at the very lowest level, some sense of that. I got to a point towards the end of my 5 years on screen as economics editor where people would regularly take photos of me on any public transport, in restaurants. They would come up to me constantly. And it was something that I had to think about with my kids about, did I want to be that person who was going to be constantly having to be on and always behaving in a certain type of way? What social media has no nuance. You're either making out that your life is perfect or you're being piled on because you're an appalling person. There seems to be sort of two basic tones of social media. Whereas, of course, human life is all about the grey. It's all about the middle bit. It's a very nuanced world that you live on. And what technology has done, alongside the infinite scroll, is the tricks of the gambling industry, the pull to refresh. So, you pull down to see if anything has come in. That is very much like the slot machine gambler's rush. Have I got something new to look at? And that is where we need to have, particularly for children, people under 16 or people under 18, how is that affecting how they see the world around us? We don't want to be over doom laden. We've had a terrible event that has happened, and the death of a young, incredibly talented man who dealt with, obviously very difficult mental health issues. There is evidence that lots of younger people who are not digital immigrants like me, I had to learn how to use a smartphone, and I worry about how I use it. I overuse it. I'm on TikTok
we
so
overuse
much.
it, and we make the excuse that we're journalists and we have to be on these phones all the time.
Too much. What we are seeing with younger people is lots of them do actually have the techniques to deal with it. They may be better than us, frankly, maybe our generation and maybe the slightly younger generation who are all digital immigrants, digital natives, possibly much more able to understand how should I control my use, downtime, detox time, put it away time. And I certainly, listening to, my children's generation, their friends, my children, they are quite au fait with most of it. As we've discussed before, we're probably in slightly different places on smartphone controls and banning smartphones for young people. There is some hope there, but what we haven't had as a generation of people is the big discussion we need to have about how social media has infected all of our relationships. And you were saying about stars are saying we've gone too far. And we were talking in our conference meeting this morning. The rapper Doja Cat, in July, she went onto Instagram's Threads platform just to question the obsessive elements that she found in her fan base, who they had styled themselves of what they call kittens, so Kittenz. And just a quote that she has from it, and there's a swear word's coming, so forgive me for that, but I just wanted to kind of get across how Doja Cat was feeling about these kittens. She said, my fans don't name themselves shit. If you call yourself a kitten or kittens, that means you need to get off your phone, get a job, and help your parents with the house. That idea that going back to, could you just go and hoover the front room? Could you just go and change the sheets? Could you just go and do a bit? That ordinariness, which, I'm older than you, Camilla. The idea of being able to constantly communicate with all my friends all the time, or the whole world about my whole life, was just absolutely baffling. You wouldn't even know what you were talking about. And we've had this journey so rapidly where the technology companies have made such profits from these new systems. And TMZ in a way is part of that whole industrialization of communication and our psychological weaknesses.
It's interesting as well to look at the example of Chapel Rowan. So that's the singer who, let's be honest, was a global megastar. One of the world's biggest pop stars, a huge following on social media. So every time she posted anything on TikTok, it got literally millions and millions and millions of views and likes. But she's basically sort of performed a complete reverse ferret and has said that actually this extraordinary online presence has led to some, what she described as really creepy behaviour. She feels that her fans aren't respecting her boundaries. She's had to cancel gigs for her own mental well-being. She's spoken openly about the struggles that she has had with becoming famous, and she's now saying she might quit the industry altogether because it's all proving too much, which I would suggest is a really brave move. The amount of sort of credence fame is now given, that it's like the be-all and end-all. You were saying earlier, back in our day, being no more likely to be on the telly than you would.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You were saying earlier, go on, you said.
Yeah, I was just to show the distance that we have travelled. When I was, 16, I felt I had no more opportunity to be famous than I had to fly to the moon. Those were two things that you could never achieve.
And yet now it seems that it's the be-all and end-all for young people. Oh, I want to be Mr. Beast. I want
very
to be
accessible.
Yeah, I want to be KSI. If they can do it, why can't anybody? And this whole kind of rise of the influencer and all the rest of it. But at the heart of it all is a shallowness. There's something desperately, desperately sad about Liam Payne trying to wrestle all these demons quite often in the public's gaze, and yet inside he's so desperate that this tragedy unfolds, and we're all sort of watching it. It does remind me of Spears. I remember seeing the whole Spears thing, the Britney Spears thing, unravel and thinking, we shouldn't be watching this. What are we doing? We shouldn't be. We're participating in this. We're almost accessories to it. The other thing, of course, about social media and the amount of time that young people particularly are spending on their phones, and I appreciate we're also guilty of it, it does erode human relationships. There was this quote from this sociologist, Sherry Turkle, which I read this morning. I thought, God, that's so spot on. Because of our phones, we are forever elsewhere. Isn't that so true?
Absolutely.
Whether you're watching the television on your phone, you know, we're literally...
Sitting down here in the office, how often are you and me just have a little click on that, I'll just have a little look.
And I'm sure you can identify with the idea of being at dinner with your own partner, both sitting there on your phones. There's something tragic about it. Are we going to have this revelation, as you say, like with smoking or maybe the wearing of seatbelts? You behave in a certain way for 20 years and then we all have an epiphany and we look back on this mad period of giving children in primary school smartphones and watching our children doom scrolling for hours on end into the night. Are we all just going to go, what on earth have we been doing?
You always hope that there are ready reckoners in human society which takes us away from precipices. And let's hope that that is true in this case. Just to go back, Asa Raskin, another amazing thing that he pointed out. Every day we waste 200,000 lifetimes just clicking on irrelevant things on our phone. A big worry to add to this, as I say, I don't want it to be overly negative, but with artificial intelligence and the creation of ways of leveraging different imagery of yourself and also spreading that far more rapidly in your own voice. So it's not just about what can you create, but it is what the 10 bots of you can create. And so again, I think the big step back thing for me is we are being led by technology. We are not leading technology. And just as we have seen, the internet started as this wonderful space for collaboration between academics at universities around the world. Part of it became a cesspit of racism, misogyny, appalling behavior, crime, paedophilia. Then came social media, a way for communities to come together and chat across geographical boundaries and share brilliant things. Some of that is still true, but it has become a place of suicide ideation and thinspiration and appalling material, crime, and some of the effects that we're talking about here about mental anxiety. Our concern has to be that artificial intelligence is going to go on exactly the same journey. This is going to help us. And in many ways, of course, it is in health diagnosis, climate change, practical, cheap solutions. But also it is going to play on the psychological methods that the technology platforms have put in place to make us look at the car crash more and more aggressively and more repeatable. And if governments around the world, this government or wherever, are not making this conversation front and centre of our political debates now, we're going to be looking back, Camilla, just as you say, in 20 years' time, when AI has weaponized social media, and thinking the other way of thinking about it is not what have we done, thank goodness we pulled back from the precipice, but the AI has pushed us nearer to the precipice.
Or AI has pushed us right over the edge, you could say.
Let's hope not. I mean, I think it is that serious. I think it is that serious that AI in certain spaces, not where it's doing great work. I think, again, the world is nuanced. It's not AI is bad or AI is good. It does amazing things and will be incredibly useful in so many ways in society, but we are not talking enough about its role in the things that encourage, to go back to the Asa Raskin quote, our human weaknesses.